And as promised, Dr. Tim McKnight is in this morning. Always good to see you. Thanks for making the trip.
Good morning.
And we wanted to talk about our family today, Uncle Arthur, right?
Yes, we have a lot of those in our family.
A lot of families have that. I mean, it's a common thing. Arthritis, on a serious note, swelling, and some of that is that. Before we talk about cause and treatment, can that be more hereditary, or some people more prone to get that than others? You think?
There may be an underlying predisposition for some people, but for the most part, it's a wear and tear kind of condition.
Yeah.
It's a breakdown of the joint, and we've talked about this with Dr. Jakubowski as well. Where the bones rub together, in your fingers, your elbow, your knee, any place where there's bone on bone, you can develop arthritis. And the first thing I wanted to say is that when we're young and healthy, our joints are really designed to be able to withstand a lot of trauma, a lot of repetitive use, because the ends of most of our bones have some cartilage on them. So our knees and our elbows and even our fingers in our joints, there's some cartilage, which is a firm. Well, we all know what cartilage looks like, I think, just from eating chicken bones and those kind of things, or seeing those. But it's a very soft, smooth covering over the end of the bone that reduces surface tension and reduces the friction that would get when bones move. And on top of that, we have a joint fluid that further reduces the friction. So the joints, when we're younger, can move without pain and in their full range of motion. But what happens over time is repetitive trauma makes us more predisposed to those injuries. So you're playing high school football and you tear your meniscus, well, you're probably going to have arthritis in that knee as you get older. In my case, a lot of baseball, playing catcher, I broke my thumb a few times, particular joint, and then having the basketball strike that thumb again, the stove thumb, and sometimes the small fractures in those joints caused a lot of repetitive trauma in my fingers. Also, I have a bone in my back, one of the vertebrae. It's the facet where the two bones meet. That's kind of formed at an awkward angle, and so I'm more predisposed to arthritis at that particular joint. It's just on the left side, around the level of my belt. So those are the kind of things that repetitive trauma and injury, and just some minor changes in your anatomy. Some of us aren't born with maybe the best anatomy, and so we're more predisposed to arthritis in those areas.
Does the cartilage get more brittle as we get older?
Yes. Well, it wears and tears down, so
Okay.
it just wears thin.
There's just less of it.
Right. So like with your knee, you lose more and more of that cartilage, and now it's bone on bone and a lot of inflammation and pain, because not only the cartilage is gone, but some of that fluid, the synovial fluid, is gone too, the joint fluid. So those things cause more pain. And but then there's other things. There's other things that we need to remember that we do that makes it worse, and one of them is sugar. Sugar is really inflammatory. And I tell my Fit for Life class, why don't you try this experiment? Have some sugar and see how your joints feel. And don't just have one cookie. Have a dozen cookies or half a dozen, and really see how you feel the next day, because you will identify all those painful joints that sometimes don't bother you, but other times do. You're looking at me like he knows what he's talking about. That's because I've tried this experiment. So sugar is a bad one. Acidic foods are also bad. So soft drinks, soda pop, anything that's acidic. Meats can also be a high protein intake, when animal meats or animal flesh can be bad, because they're made up of amino acids, and amino acids are acidic. So if you eat a lot of meat, if you have a large steak on a Friday night, you may have some more arthritis pain that next morning in your joints. And then another one that I wanted to mention was MSG, monosodium glutamate, which is it's a preservative. And this is really interesting, because I looked this up. I just did a search. I just Google search monosodium glutamate, and does it cause arthritis? And there's all these comments that no, it doesn't. It hasn't really been proven to do that. And so I'm reading through these. And I'm like, wow, this is completely different than what I thought. So then I look up on PubMed.gov, which is the site that we go to for medical journals. There's a lot of research on this. So one of the points I want to make here is that we're trying to understand medical problems, don't just Google it. If you really want to know, go to PubMed, which is short for Publishing Medicine.gov, and type in the keywords you're looking for, and you'll see these summaries or these abstracts of all these studies. But the other thing, when you come across medical information like this, you don't want to just jump on the first article that you see that supports what you think it should be, right? Because there's a lot of studies that have just done an observational study and it doesn't prove anything. It just says, oh, we observe this. But they haven't really determined if there's a trend there or if there's any truth behind this claim. So when I did this on monosodium glutamate, it really you could see as I read the article that they were referring to many articles. So one of the things that they said in this particular abstract was that the chronic consumption of MSG has been suggested, so not proving, but they're suggesting, and a lot of studies suggest this, as a cause for toxicity, inflammation, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and premalignant changes. And this was a particular search on MSG and arthritis. And so one of their remedies that they've studied this a number of times. I don't know if it's been proven, but the observational studies are that ginger is a good supplement to help with this.
Oh.
So that may be something for the listeners to think about. But it's really anything that's anti-inflammatory can help, because this is an inflammatory problem. When our joints hurt, they're inflamed, either again from repetitive trauma or from foods and conditions that cause more inflammation. So a diabetic generally has more inflammation. So they have to be careful of this. Someone who's obese has more inflammation. That belly is full of inflammation, and we can measure all these inflammatory markers. So they're going to tend to have more arthritis pain just because of the weight. But as you control the diabetes, as you lose that excess weight, the inflammation, and we can measure this with a C-reactive protein in a blood test, the inflammation goes down. We see this in our Fit for Life class all the time. We tell them, measure this before, measure this after. These inflammatory markers go down, and they say, yeah, I don't hurt as bad.
Yeah, it's the tangible feeling when the corresponds with the numbers then, right?
Right. But then, I always try to prove the contrary, and the contrary is really blow it sometime. Have a bunch of steak, have a bunch of sugar, and you'll immediately be reminded.
That's called a birthday.
There you go. I like that birthday. Good thing we only have them once a year,
right?
Though, right? So those are all important things to do. But another thing that we can do is good hydration, drinking plenty of fluid. That helps to give fluid to those joints. And Dr. Jakubowski has mentioned this. And then a diet that's low in oxidative kind of foods. So fast foods and packaged foods, I call them dead foods. They actually cause more oxidation in your tissues, more inflammation. Live foods are the foods you get from the produce section. So those are the foods that can help fight this inflammatory process. And then another thing that's really important is good mechanics of the joints. Now, my fingers, where there's some arthritis in a couple of them, there's really nothing mechanically wrong. I just have to keep moving them. But I have a shoulder that sometimes flares up, and there's a mechanical problem why that's happened. It is actually frozen once. I had the scar tissue torn out of it while I was awake, which was a really pleasant experience. But that actually is a predisposing area of my body because of the previous injury. So I have to watch that, and I have to make sure that my muscles are tight in the right places and that they're stretched in other places. Same with my back, particularly with my back. And I'm sure your listeners would have the same experience. One other thing that I found that could be really helpful with a lot of the joints, and this is also one of our demonstrations in Fit for Life with Coach Hartzell, is compression and traction. So what I do with the base of my thumb when it's inflamed is I'll wrap it real tight with a rubber band or some type of a rubber product and squeeze it really tight for maybe 30 seconds. And what I'm doing is I'm squeezing the inflammation out of the joint. And when I release that band, then I get fresh blood in, and it helps to heal the joint and relieve the pain. It's remarkable how well that can work.
Yeah.
Now, if it's your knee or a larger joint, you can do the same thing. You can wrap it tight, but really the best thing is to put traction on that. So you either need to have somebody pulling on your pulling your leg, or doing something else to put traction on it. We can actually do this with a rubber band around your foot, with it secured to a post maybe in your basement, and you scoot away and you feel that traction, and do a gentle bend of the knee and let it straighten out. That can actually also be really helpful. It's not curative, but it relieves the pain sometimes for several days. I did this once to a lady, and her knee pain was gone for 10 days.
Great.
So those kind of things can help. One last thing.
And cheaper than drugs.
And cheaper than drugs, because drugs, medications, anti-inflammatories, injections, those are the last resort. But one thing I wanted to mention, because I think listeners right now have noticed this the last couple of days, because I clearly noticed it, is with these changes in barometric pressure. Holy cow. I saw a patient yesterday who has chronic pain. Her pain was really flared up. My knees were really sore on Saturday, and I hadn't really done anything. And you were mentioning before we went on air that your hips were sore, and you thought you had an explanation, but it could have been the change in barometric pressure. And so when the temperatures go up and down, and we're seeing this happen this week, and we're going to see it Wednesday.
Yeah.
It can be an issue. So when I did a medical search on this, it says that changes in barometric pressure can cause expansion and contraction of tendons, muscles, bones, and scar tissue, resulting in pain in the tissues that are affected by arthritis. So they even think that low temperatures can increase the thickness of these joint fluids and make the joints a little bit slower to move, a little bit more difficult to move. So I think some people that can tell you we got a cold front coming in because their joints hurt. That's a real phenomenon. But it tells you that you've got arthritis at that joint,
Yes.
right? So then it's like, how do I minimize that? Well, eat foods from the produce section of the store, get your diabetes in control your autoimmune conditions, lose the excess weight, restore the normal function to your joints, and try compression therapy or traction therapy on your joints, and make those medical interventions your last option. So if you're going to take something like ibuprofen, I would take 2 or 3 ibuprofen a couple times a day, maybe with food. Don't take it on an empty stomach. But you have to be careful. If you've got a predisposition to ulcers, you probably shouldn't do that. If you're on a blood thinner like Coumadin, you shouldn't do that. If you have kidney issues, you shouldn't do that unless you talk to your medical provider. So that's not, even though it's over the counter, it's not safe for everyone. And if you're not sure, check with somebody. So, and the last thing that we can do in some of our joints is inject it with cortisone or a steroid. That gives usually immediate relief, and sometimes for months. But every time you stick a needle in a joint, there's a chance for infection. You clearly are going to damage the synovial membrane and form more scar tissue. And so over time, this is not the best solution. This is like I'm going to have my knee replaced next year, but I got a vacation coming up this summer. I just want to be able to walk.
Yeah.
So that's really what that's intended to be. And some people just want this every 3 or 4 months, and it's not really the best advice. So hopefully this helps all of us.
Leafy green vegetables
and berries.
Okay.
Really good.
We'll add berries to that.
Okay.
Right. Thanks so much
You're
for
welcome.
that. As we talk about arthritis, something everybody is familiar with Dr. Tim McKnight. And our talk with the doc this morning